Thanks.
Can I get a cup?
Where did it go? If it's in the field house. I like connected, but I get. Yes.
I know there's a small.
What is your name?
I
don't know what
Okay. How'd your essay go? Wow. You're putting that on my shoulders, huh? All right. Well, okay. So, quiet, please. Okay, I'm talking. All right. So with that essay, I'll grade them within a week, I'm hoping. I think that's possible. And then I'll get them back to you. And then you have till the end of November to rewrite them. So if this one was lousy for some reason, it's not the end of the world. It's also your first rhetorical analysis you're writing for me. First of many. So hopefully you loved the process of writing the Frederick Douglass rhetorical analysis.
Now I look back, I like it.
Because if you look at your schedules and soon to be Canvas, but it's not built out that far.
Don't ask that.
Good, I need you to talk. Quiet, okay. All right, so if you look at your schedules, you'll see on, oh my gosh, quiet. It might not work. Sit in our chosen seats, I'm realizing now. But if you look at your schedules, you will see that, if I could find it, you have a civil rights rhetorical analysis number 1 due on November 18th. And you have civil rights rhetorical analysis number 2 due December 2nd. So you're welcome. You get a whole bunch of chances to practice writing rhetorical analyses essays. So if you're wanting to get started on those, I know it's very early, but if you're wanting to start thinking about them, the assignment is to find in your civil rights packets 2 essays. Well, 1 essay per one of these speeches per essay. So I'm sorry, this is a hard way of saying that. You're going to find 1 selection from the civil rights packet. You're going to read it and you're going to write a rhetorical analysis of it. So you get to have lots of choices for which one you talk about. It can't be one that we're talking about together. You're going to be reading these on your own. So it can't be Martin Luther King because there's 2 Martin Luther King selections in there, but we're talking about them together. It can't be the W.E.B. Du Bois that we're doing today or James Baldwin, but there's tons of stuff in there. So if you have a question about what you can or can't do in there, let me know. By the time you're writing them, it should be really clear which ones, but there we go. Let's talk about the test. So I've got the AP Lang test at the end of the year. I've got 9 of you that have signed up and paid for your exam. So that's awesome. I've got 7 people who have signed up but who have not paid. And this year, Heather down in the counseling office, she's not going to order any tests if you haven't paid yet. So you've got to pay that by the November 12th deadline. Yes,
You read off who was like completed it.
you want me to? Is that not personal? Okay. All right, I got, Cressida Bean is finished. Taya has finished. Athena has finished. Lexi Merritt, Parker, Jonah, Spencer, Zach, and Ben.
Oh, I think my mom did mine yesterday, so.
Okay, these are from last week, that's Friday. So you have till November 12th to finish these. So it's coming up fast, and the code for our class is, oh, I had it written down on a different sheet. There it is. 24 VAGG. Okay, so I've sent that out via Canvas announcement. And then we sent out all the information for how to sign up. Do you guys need that information sent again? Okay, I will send out that information again via Skyward and via Canvas so that you have that. And does anyone have any questions? Yeah, Daniel? I think you can get, yeah, I think you can get partial money back up until a certain date. But
$40.
you have to pay $40 on top of what you
Yeah,
just paid.
if they like already order it, and then you end up not taking it.
Oh, that sucks.
So-
Yeah. Let me say this, I usually have like 1 or 2 kids who decide not to take the test at the end of the year. And I always feel at the end of the year that those kids could have passed it easily. They just like don't feel like taking the test, which I understand, it's a long test. But for the most part, you're going to feel very prepared at the very end, and you're going to like want to get those college credits. For some classes, like for AP Lit, I'm a little less like, you must take this class because the credits aren't quite as good. For AP Lang, these are like the best college credits you can get. If you can get out of your freshman writing class, that's a dream come true. Those classes can be a real drag. So take the test. If you have them, you take the test. If you're on free and reduced lunch, I think it's like half price or 60% off or something like that. And so you just go talk to the counselor.
Wait, lunch is free for everyone. Yeah.
Well, there's a program called Free and Reduced Lunch, and if you were on it, you'd know you were on it. Yeah. So if you're like, am I? No. Okay. Any questions about that stuff? Okay, so I will post that code again to Canvas and all of the information for how to sign up. Okay. And I'm gonna like be sort of bringing that up every class year. It's gonna get old. So let's do word of the day. Do you guys need a new sheet? Okay. Okay, our word is actually a phrase. It's false dichotomy.
Are we done with Frederick Douglass?
We are.
Really?
Let me address that later.
Okay.
Okay, I need everyone with me. Did you write down false dichotomy? Okay, I'm just gonna read out the definition so I don't have to write it. Okay. It is a situation in which 2 alternative points of view. A situation in which 2 alternative points of view are presented as the only options. A situation in which 2 alternative points of view are presented as the only options when others are available. Okay, so this is what is called a logical fallacy. So basically that means that the logic of a false dichotomy is not sound logic. Meaning that somebody, meaning that it doesn't logically make sense. If you're giving two options and you're saying these are the only options, like logically that is untrue. However, writers will use logical fallacies all the time. And just because they're using logical fallacies does not necessarily make them ineffective. Often a writer will use a logical fallacy to be effective. Why, I mean, if you're like knowingly saying something untrue, why would you do that other than to be effective? So sometimes I think we learn, how many have learned logical fallacies in class? Sometimes we learn those, so only a few of us, but sometimes we learn those and we think, we can take down the author completely with this logical fallacy. We can say this guy is bad at writing because he has this logical fallacy, right? But often if you're using it intentionally, you're a better writer because you're using it. Not always, sometimes it's like too easy to break apart, but it can be used intentionally. I want to show you an example of that. So we're going to read this essay today called The Value of Agitation. And there's a quote in it that says, either we must let the evil alone. Yeah. And refuse to hear of it. Or listen to it. Or we must try and write it. Okay, so that is, his name is W.E.B. Boys. All right, either we must let the evil alone and refuse to hear of it, or listen to it. Sorry, it's so hard to read this. It's not my favorite sentence in the world, but it's such false dichotomy. Either we must let the evil alone and refuse to hear of it or listen to it, or we must try and write it. So there's two options that he is putting up here. We've got this one, and we've got this one. And he's using the word must. So it's like you only get these two options. We must either let evil alone or we must try and write it. What do you think of those two decisions? Like, is that just a regular old dichotomy or is it a false dichotomy? Yeah.
Well, why can't you listen to it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there can be somebody who listens to it and they're like, no, I actually like the evil and I'm going to keep going with the evil. You know, there could be someone who fully embraces it or somebody who just completely ignores it, but there can't really be, he's saying there can only be these two options. So there are other options. So this is a false dichotomy, but it's a really powerful false dichotomy. So tell me a little bit about the way that it's worded. Why do you think he uses let evil alone? Yeah.
Instead of saying that if you aren't doing anything against it, by saying I accept this.
Okay, good. So it's like you are by doing nothing. You are in support, right? Why do you think let?
Let kind of implies that it's a choice you're making.
Okay, good.
Making the goal and intention.
Okay, good. So there's this intentionality to this, right? That I think is really important to him. It's like no one is innocent in this kind of dichotomy. Either you're going to let it alone and be guilty, or you're going to be the hero and try and write it. Yeah, Maxwell.
Basically, like, it's worse because good help you're keeping the person.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you do that with myself? Night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like this also
Yeah, good.
and wisely thought of with like kind of suffer a little bit, but will it run its course?
Yeah, okay, so I think that's the attitude he's tapping into, right? Is that if you're letting evil alone, it's like you've got this idea that, yeah, I'm identifying it as evil, but I'm kind of just like gonna let it step back and sort of resolve itself, right? But if you let's say you let the baby alone and the baby needs to eat and the baby needs its diaper changed, it's just gonna get worse and worse and worse and worse, right? So there's this way that it's like takes on because you've made this choice. Evil's going to take on its own actions and evil's going to be able to like snowball, you know? Refuse to hear of it or listen to it. I think that's interesting that he puts both, even though I don't love the like lack of parallelism it sets up. Why do you think that?
I think that's really interesting because you could have put here twice, but by doing different words in twice, so they have like slightly different meanings. So
Yeah.
this new, I think it kind of means like eat, like do stuff.
So here is the action. And listen is the
I say listen is like listen as in like act. Hear is just like because it's talking about refuse to hear, so just leave it alone.
good. Causes action, not like it's like actually not hearing.
It's so
How's that
broad
here?
though. I wonder if it makes it dichotomy just a bad one because it's just like the option is so broad.
Hear or listen to it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like if you are not doing anything about evil, that is like you refusing then to actually do anything about what you are listening to. Make sense? All right, and then we must try and write it is kind of the way that he sets up that false dichotomy. What does it mean to write evil? What does he want people to do? Yes. Okay, good. So he wants us to actively fight against evil and become like the heroes, right? To become someone in the right. It's like creating these heroic actions for us. And why try? Instead of just write it. Fix the evil. It seems pretty wishy-washy for him to say that, doesn't it?
Well, it's like something you can't back up, like, unless you have, I guess that's where the logic comes in, because if there's nothing to support it, like, then it's false, because if you can say, oh, try and write it, like, how?
Okay, so he's not giving us ways, right?
Yeah, you need to be like, okay, so first we're gonna like, get food from this ship. and
This
then
is how we're
to
going to
feed it
write the
to-
evil. Yeah, doesn't
I think it also like saying that and you would use
Okay, good. So broad, even if you don't think you can, but also even if you can't. He's like against that idea of do or do not, there is no try. He's like, no, all there is try. Like you can try, and that's all you can know going into something. And the fact that you are trying against evil, that's like you're in the right. You've become the hero, even if you don't succeed. So this idea that there's like no specific ways that you can do that, that's actually quite hopeful for this sentence. Because he's saying like whatever you do to try to right the evil, that's going to turn you into the hero. All right, write down some effects if you haven't already of the false dichotomy here. He doesn't want you to have any other options. And then we're going to read the essay this comes from. So open up your civil rights packet. I don't know, find it. It's in the blue pages. I wish I had page numbers, but I don't. It's the value of agitation. I have one on the back seat. No, we have it. Are there more back there, Cameron? Okay, so if you need to use one, they're back on the back table. It's called the value of agitation. And then I'm passing back these worksheets, so pass them on back.
I found it. The value of oh, there we
All right, so today we're going to take those skills you learned in long form with Frederick Douglass's book, and we're going to look at what it might more realistically be like on the AP test when it asks you to do a rhetorical analysis. So this essay is maybe like slightly long for that, maybe like half a page longer than you'll normally get, but it's pretty representative of the size of the piece of rhetoric you're going to have to analyze. It's a speech that this dude, W.E.B. Du Bois, gave. It's an essay, actually. It's not a speech. So Du Bois is a pretty amazing figure. So he was born, oh shoot, I don't have the year he was born, but he was not born a slave. He was born after slavery. So he grew up free. He wanted to be, even as a little kid, he wanted to go to Harvard University. That was like the place that he like saw as like the epitome, the height of education was Harvard University. When he was of age to go to an undergraduate program, Harvard was not allowing in African Americans, and so he went to a historically Black college. I can't remember which one, but he went to a historically Black college. He got his undergraduate, and when he was getting his undergraduate, he was impressing a lot of people with his skills. So the president of the United States, I can't remember at the time, he kind of recognized the talent in Du Bois, and so they selected him for like a scholarship, and he ended up getting a PhD through Harvard University and completing part of that over in Germany at the University of Berlin, which was like considered like the best university in Europe at the time. So he was like this amazing scholar. He was the first African American to get a PhD from Harvard University, or to even go to Harvard University. So he's like this amazing guy. He was kind of beefing with another really amazing scholar named Booker T. Washington. So do you guys know about Booker T. Washington? He was the head of Tuskegee University, which was another historically Black college, and his whole sort of approach to racism in the South, and well, just in the United States, his approach was kind of like, white people have their place and they're racist, you know, there's lots of racism out there. And we need to, like, as a Black community, his idea was like, we need to like prove to white people that we're like good enough to be considered as equals. It was this thing that's kind of, it's known as uplift suasion. It was like, they won't respect us as we are now. And so we need to like sort of change ourselves to be sort of respectable to them. And he was like, they're not going to respect us if we try to come for their jobs. So let's take over kind of like the labor market and like trades. So his big thing was like, teach people how to be plumbers and carpenters and so on. So that's Booker T. Washington. W.E. Du Bois was like, Booker T, I think, you know, you're an amazing scholar. You are so wrong about this. That is so racist. You know, he was like, we don't need to uplift to anywhere. We are valuable, equal people because we are human beings, right? So he was like, so we can become scholars, we can become doctors, we can become lawyers, like all of it. Like we are like equal. So they're having this kind of back and forth in journals, kind of yelling at each other. They're very angry with each other, these two. Booker T. Washington was kind of the darling of the like political machine at the time because they saw him as like only doing good for them. Like basically they saw Booker T. Washington as like keeping African Americans in their place while also like, you know, increasing like people's sense of pride in themselves. But W.E.B. Du Bois is not having that. So anyway, let me read this to you. And as we're reading The Value of Agitation, you're pretending that this is like a piece of rhetoric that you got on the AP test. And you've got to really quickly find the arguments and find the rhetorical strategies that he is using in his essay. So the same thing that we did with Frederick Douglass, but instead of doing it over a course of a few weeks, you're doing it over the course of a few minutes. All right. So you can write on these. Okay, you ready? There are those people in the world who object to agitation, and one cannot wholly blame them. Agitation, after all, is unpleasant. It means that while you are going peaceably and joyfully on your way, some half-mad person insists upon saying things that you do not like to hear. They may be true, but you do not like to hear them. You'd rather wait till some convenient season, or you take up your newspaper and instead of finding pleasant notices about your friends and the present progress of the world, you read some restless folks who insist on talking about wrong and crime and unpleasant things. It'd be much better if we did not have to have agitation. If we had a world where everything was going so well and it was unnecessary often to protest strongly, even wildly, of the evil and the wrong of the universe. As a matter of fact, however, no matter how unpleasant the agitator is, and no matter how inconvenient and unreasonable his talk, yet we must ever have him with us. And why? Because this is a world where things are not all right. We are gifted with human nature, which does not do the right or even desire the right always. So long as these things are true, then we are faced by this dilemma. Either we must let evil alone and refuse to hear of it or listen to it, or we must try and right it. Now, very often it happens that the evil is there. The wrong has been done, and yet we do not hear of it. We do not know about it. Here then comes the agitator. He is the herald. He is the prophet. He is the man that says to the world, there are evils which you do not know, but which I know, and you must listen to them. Now, of course, there may be agitators who are telling the truth, and there may be agitators who are telling untruths. Those who are not telling the truth may be lying, or they may be mistaken. So that agitation in itself does not necessarily mean always the right and always reform. Here then, it is someone who thinks that he has discovered some dangerous evil and wants to call the attention of good men of the world to it. If he does not persevere, we may perhaps pass him by. If he is easily discouraged, we may perhaps think that the evil which he thought he saw has been cured. But if he is sincere and if he is persistent, then there is but one thing for a person to do who wants to live in a world worth living in. That is, listen to him carefully, prove his tale, and then try and right the wrong. If we remember the history of all great reform movements, we remember that they have been preceded by agitation. Take, for instance, the suppression of the slave trade. It was in a day when slavery could not be successfully attacked, but there was no doubt of the horrors of the slave trade. The best and worst people alike admitted that. Here came a young man, just graduated from college. By writing a prize essay, he found himself interested in this great evil. He began to know and learn of things which other people did not know. Not that they knew nothing about them, but that they had not brought together all the facts. One isolated person knew that fact, and one knew this fact, but no one person knew both facts in juxtaposition. When they did become acquainted with all the facts, he was sure that they must be moved to act. What then must he do? He must agitate. It was not pleasant. It was putting himself in jeopardy. He was called upon to lose friends in some cases, and in all cases to make himself unpleasant, insistent, persistent, telling of things that people did not want to hear about because they were not interested in them. He must interest people in things in which they were not interested before, which is a hard task in this busy world. And yet, nevertheless, if Thomas Clarkson, he was a pioneer British abolitionist. Did we read anything from Clarkson this year? No, we didn't. Had not persisted, he would have much less than a chance to agitate for human rights today. So it is with all great movements. They must be preceded by agitation. In the present status of the Negro, it is particularly necessary that we today make the world realize what his position is. Make them realize that he is not merely insisting on ornamental rights and neglecting plain duties, but that the rights we want are the rights that are necessary, inevitable before we can rightly do our duties. Mrs. Charlotte Gilman, she wrote a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper. Has anyone read that story? It's like a very feminist story about a woman whose like husband is like, oh, you're so sick. I'm going to lock you away in this room and just like never let you come out. And she starts to go crazy. All right. Mrs. Charlotte, it's a great story. Mrs. Charlotte Gilman has a poem somewhere where she speaks of that rule, which is to be laid down in the great future state. Unless a man works, he may not eat. And she says very aptly that the cart is before the horse, because unless a man eats, he cannot work. So to those people who are saying to Black men today, do your duties first and then clamor for rights, he's speaking specifically to Booker T. Washington right there. We have a right to answer, and to answer insistently that the rights we are clamoring for are those that will enable us to do our duties. that we cannot possibly be asked to do any partial measure of our duty even, unless we can have those rights and have them now. We realize this. The great mass of people in the United States do not realize it. What then are we to do? We may sit in courteous and dumb, self-forgetting silence until other people are interested and come to our rescue. But is it reasonable to suppose that this is going to happen before degeneration and destruction overtake us? This is a busy world. People are attending to their own affairs as they ought to. The man that has a grievance is supposed to speak for himself. No one can speak for him. No one knows the thing as well as he does. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that if the man does not complain, that it is because he has no complaint. If a man does not express his needs, then it is because his needs are filled. And it has been our great mistake in the last decade that we have been silent and still have not complained, when it was our duty, not merely to ourselves, but to our country and to humanity in general, to complain and to complain loudly. It is then high time that the Negro agitator should be heard in the land. It is not a pleasant role to play. It is not always pleasant to nice ears to hear a man ever coming with his dark facts and unpleasant conditions. Nevertheless, it is the highest optimism to bring forward the dark side of any human picture. When a man does this, he says to the world, things are bad, but it is worthwhile to let the world know that things are bad in order that they may become better. The real crushing pessimism takes hold of the world when people say things are so bad that they are not worth complaining of because they cannot be made better. It is manifest that within the last year, the whole race of the United States has awakened to the fact that they have lost ground and must start complaining and complain loudly. It is their business to complain. This complaint should be made with reason and with strict regard to the truth, but nevertheless it should be made. And it is interesting to find even those persons who were deriding complaint a few years ago joining in the agitation today. We of the Niagara movement welcome them. We are glad of help from all sources. We are confirmed in our belief that if a man stand up and tell the thing he wants and point out the evil around him, that this is the best way to get rid of it. May we not hope then that we are going to have in the next century a solid front on the part of colored people in the United States saying we want education for our children, and we do not have it today in any large measure. We want full political rights, and we never have had that. We want to be treated as human beings, and we want those of our race who stand on the threshold and within the veil of crime to be treated not as beasts, but as men who can be reformed, or as children who can be prevented from going further in their career. If we all stand and demand this if we all stand and demand this insistently, the nation must listen to the voice of 10 millions. Such a good speech. Okay, so in some ways he's continuing the arguments of Frederick Douglass, but in other ways he's adding to these arguments and it's taking a different route. So I want you to take a second just on your own and write down, what do you think his argument is? Try and be as specific as possible. So it's not like racism is bad, but like what is his specific argument, maybe about why we should agitate or what the value of agitation actually is. And just write it on the green sheet. we're gonna group up today, so I think Juliana, over, right? Rachel and Juliana. Yeah. You'll go over here and be in this group with like 5 girls right here. And then we'll have you 4 girls right here, and Sarah will be in this group. And then I'll have Spencer turn around and be in the group with, it's awkward how you sat. So I'm gonna have Zach and Maxwell and Daniel and Spencer be in a group. Yeah. And then we got you 4 up here. And then you 4 with Ben and Skyly and Simon and Noble. Wait, and then that leaves it awkward enough. Noble, you be in this group of 5 up here. And then Simon on back to Zoe and Ben. You guys are in group 4. Okay. Did everyone get in a group? Think so? Okay. All right. So in those little groups, I want you to look at all of the different arguments that you have, and I want you, you'll still have space because I left you so much room. I want you to, as a group, write an argument that you think encompasses all of the parts of the argument. So you're all going to probably bring a little something different. Make sure the argument you write encompasses them, but still remains specific. Might be that it ends up being 2 sentences instead of 1, but that's okay. All right, discuss.
I've said, no matter what happens.
You're in this group of like 5 right here.
Let's just.
Use education to cause.
Like I said, education is necessary.
So you all now are going to collaborate, like encompass all the parts of the argument. You're going to write that down, the group argument. Okay. So once you share your arguments with everyone, you're going to work together to write an argument that encompasses all of the group's arguments. So like you want to make sure you get all the parts of their argument.
Mine was the most effective way to write it on. Kind of like the yeah.
What'd you say, Simon?
You're not.
I think agitating is a really good word. Which is interesting. Yeah. Annoying people. Right. Like, the way he
Yes.
Literally all of ours are so similar. Yeah.
When your group has it, you're going to come up and write it on the board.
Yeah, let's do
Yeah, you're going to write it on the board. Once your group has it, you're writing the argument up on the board. You got it. All right, come on up.
Go ahead, Ellie.
Silo recreation.
I know, I saw like everybody was singing for like, oh, there's Halloween. And I was like, yeah, we're like Halloween.
I'm right with this. Everybody.
Yeah, his name is Du Bois, not Du Bois. He's not French.
So it is Du Bois?
Du Bois. W-E-B. I don't know what his actual first name is.
Considering.
These days. Not 1907.
Is that why you got this going on?
Boys coming out?
I have a whole list on my. I'll show you.
It's so nice, 'cause like I don't like.
You're gonna see a movie and you're like,
The same thing with
what I did. We go into game, we get a shake for one, all.
I received.
Really want to do.
people like my friends.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. It would be a lot. I did. About marshmallow. I'm not going to. Well, it's $5. Inflation, that's like.
That's what he said. Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, no, I'm not pointing out things that are wrong. I'm trying to look at where, so I tried to circle things that some groups are answering the question in their argument that other groups are using kind of vague. So I'm not pointing out things that are wrong with this, but like here, this group, hang on. Here, this group, it kind of, we're not quite sure about audience, like who is supposed to hear it. But over here, oh, maybe we never really say that. Over here, we've got like a question about what the reform should be, but over here, they're answering that. Here, they're also asking what the reform is. They are talking about bringing it to attention, but again, like we're not quite sure about the audience. Here, is it our duty or is it African American duty at the time? Like I think this sort of like is implied, and they don't need to say this, but like in the 1900s, early 1900s, right? And And then out the flaws, this leaves that blank, but this one, again, kind of answers that with this idea of equality, but this one even kind of gets to that earlier. And then over there, they say complain, but over here it's fight to agitate, and it's using that word together. So what I'm trying to point out is that I think we can find a thesis statement now together, an argument that kind of combines all the specifics.
Is an argument and thesis statement like almost the same thing, like the beginning?
A thesis statement is an argument plus rhetorical strategies, yeah. So I think we can find an argument here that combines everything. So I think everyone's could use just like a slightly more specificity to make sure that we're combining all the arguments. So with your group, revise it so it includes all of the arguments in one. So to be as specific as possible. Here, let me say that a different way. I think we need to know what should be reformed. I think we need to know who is agitating. We need to know who is listening or who is changing, or audience.
We just have that.
And we need to know how to agitate. So I think if we combine everything, if we get all those specifics in there, then you'll get the complete argument. So try again.
Okay.
Okay. Boyd argues that
I like it. It is necessary for
But use current political correct terms, even though he's using old ones. Yeah.
All right, then fail.
civil.
Two is definitely accurate. And two is accurate.
Okay.
I know that.
Political.
For like 9 years.
Okay, so.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. What about
How many groups feel like they have it? Raise your hand. Not quite. Okay. Yeah.
Well, he talked about like
Boyd argues that through societal agitation of politics.
That is harder. Who's the audience? We can talk about it. Directing some of it at.
Okay, I gotta move on in 1 minute, so do your best. It's an exercise, but if you get close, that works. Because yours is really, really solid as it is. I think what you need
We're trying to
is
figure
something about audience.
Yeah, we're trying to figure that out. Flavored by.
Yeah, so right now you've got it in the passive voice, and so to say to be heard, you're missing subject. So you don't have a subject, it's like kind of a sign that you're like not quite sure. So do you think, is he like saying like, we gotta change those racist minds? Or is he saying, people are ignorant of people and we need to, we gotta change their minds about their ignorance? Which one do you think it is? Go on. Yeah, because I think what he's saying here is almost like it's a given that we want racial equality. And that's not a given for everyone, but he's saying, yeah, it's a given for my audience. And so we need to educate those people who want racial equality, but who don't, who are ignorant about like issues of race, right? So somewhere you gotta fit in that idea.
Not the black people.
Ignorant or naive Americans. So don't be afraid to like switch up in the sentences or somewhere too. Maybe. Ignorant or naive Americans have to hear complaints. Yeah, I'd break it up into 2 sentences. Okay, let's regather. I'm not saying mine is perfect. I'm just trying to fit everything in. If they desire racial equality, it's the duty of those who recognize oppression, often because they are the ones being oppressed, to educate those who are ignorant about racism in America. So I'm trying to fit in audience, ignorant, the purpose, racial equality, how like you're supposed to agitate, educate, and who is doing the agitation. I tried to fit those into one spot. I think this part I added because it's an interesting argument. It's an argument that in 2021 it's not quite popular to believe in. And that makes sense to me to say like it's the duty of those who are oppressed to like educate everybody else. Seems like the wrong way to go about it in 2021. But in 1907, I think that's what he is saying here. So now we got to get into the rhetorical strategy. So that will be the first part of your thesis statement, just identifying the argument. And did you see how much work it took to get to a specific argument? You don't want your thesis statement to stay on a very kind of like broad level because it sets you up to remain broad for the whole essay. Yeah.
So is that why it seems like he talks about like laws in general, but is that why this thesis statement focuses on racism? So that, you know, I say we can racism specifically.
Yes, definitely. Because he's not writing this in a vacuum, right? Like he is writing this with his NAACP, early NAACP like meeting in mind. You know, he's writing about how it's high time that the Negro agitators should be heard in the land. So he's writing about racial oppression. And if you keep it kind of vague and that like he's just writing about agitation in general, it's going to be hard to write about why these rhetorical strategies will reach an audience, because anyone could hear that message, you know? Yeah, good question. Okay, so the rhetorical strategies. For that, you are looking for all those word of the days that I give you, for sure. That's why I give them to you. It makes it easier to find that stuff. But you're also looking for just choices that he is making. So instead of saying rhetorical strategies, you could just say language choices. What choices is he making with his language? The order of his language, the word choice of his language, the images of his language. What choices is he making to be persuasive to his audience? So 1907, he is publishing this in a journal that is quite, well, let's read the prompt. So on the green paper, I wrote a prompt for you. It says, W.E.B. Du Bois was an author, speaker, professor, and activist who fought the injustices of Jim Crow laws and segregation, focusing on discriminatory labor laws. He was kind of a communist. Sorry to break your heart if you were. Yeah. Honestly, almost everybody fighting for racial equality at this time period was communist. In 1907, when he wrote the essay, The Value of Agitation, he was the leader of the Niagara Movement, a group of African-American activists fighting for equal rights in America. He wrote this essay directly in response to Booker T. Washington's plea for racial accommodation and national solidarity. The well-written essay analyzed the rhetorical strategies Du Bois uses to argue for the necessity of political agitation. So in this essay, did you notice he is not arguing like to convince everyone that racial equality should be a thing? His audience already believes that. He's saying, here's how we solve racial inequalities, right? So you're trying to figure out what language choices is he making in this essay to reach this audience that feels that racial equality should be fixed, but that agitation is kind of annoying. What rhetorical strategies is he using? So try and just make a big long list with your group about rhetorical strategies. And don't be afraid to just describe them if you don't know the word for it.
Literally, my like, if I had like a
I think about that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have expositions on the
That's the beginning of
It's when there's two gas stations. So That's actually like quite.
What's the strategy called? Ask questions and answer. Many more?
Okay.
Okay, as I'm looking, here, regroup for a second. As I'm looking, a lot of people have like they've identified like the word of the day stuff that he's doing, like hypophora or metaphors or things like that. Now look and see if you can find some that you can't actually name in one word. Like, for example, he starts by introducing the counter argument, where he's like, lots of people hates agitation, it's unpleasant, we don't like it. Now I'm gonna get into what my real argument is. So think about that kind of stuff that you can't necessarily name in a word, but you can kind of describe what he is doing with the rhetoric or what he's doing with the language to convince the audience. See if you can find a couple of words.
Like you do it like you would.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
That'd be so funny. I was just like that.
I love it. Scott, you're always right. Scott.
Or like, she said. Oh, we have to blend it.
There's a call to action. There we go. Call to action.
Many calls to action.
He uses an example. He uses.
But still, there's a specific one.
Yeah, so mine is like
Yeah.
two Parataxis make nature is you're wrong.
The fries, they shape it.
I guess me a politics.
The boys was a
I've never had like strawberry. You get really
God should be awarding this.
Counter argument slain.
pretty sure we could rewrite.
Try and start.
Okay, let's get together and make a big long list of these. So we already mentioned there is an example of the hypophora in there. Hippophora, I don't know. There are some metaphors. What else are we seeing in this? Okay, let's start with repetition. Which words are being repeated?
Yeah, like
It is not.
agitation. This movement. No matter. And we put
He
persistent.
says it is.
Persistent.
It is.
Okay, let me get your attention. Do I have them all?
It is.
Is there multiple instances of when he says juxtaposition, or are you saying that's a different
No,
strategy?
it's only one. Oh,
Okay.
I was just reading that.
Are there any other words that he's repeating?
He says instantly a few times. I don't know.
Good.
Actually, he says
Oh, he says duty a lot.
Oh.
And then someone mentioned that he's using juxtaposition. What is he juxtaposing?
Like fact, but that's not.
Facts.
Wait a second.
So you're figuring out when you're talking about juxtaposition, you have to think about what is actually being juxtaposed. So it could be ideas, it could be physical objects, it could be whatever these opposite ideas are that they are being put into kind of context with each other.
Juxtaposing history and their current situation.
Okay, cool. History with current events. Good. What else?
In the sentence he's using the word, it says how people aren't using their facts that they separately remember.
Yeah, what are the two facts that they know?
Just, what did I? It just says all the facts about
Just
it.
graduated college, so like.
Where does he use the word juxtaposition? I haven't looked specifically at that juxtaposition.
Oh, I think that is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think he's talking sort of more vaguely about sort of what has been happening, but that's not him using juxtaposition. That's him using the word juxtaposition to describe how somebody is coming to like be educated, right? But there is tons of juxtaposition in the data.
Maybe juxtaposing like the privileges of the white man versus
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, Noble?
Societal. Like, even though it's like something politically, it still has to change. a lot of
Awesome.
societal.
Good.
You can make laws. but-
Yeah.
He also juxtaposes like it says generation and description. So I guess like,
I'm gonna say that's more parallel.
okay, yeah, so it's gonna compare generation to something else. But
Generation kind of leads to a distraction. So I'm gonna say those two ideas are parallel. There's a part in juxtaposition where it's like silence and speaking. Like agitating is sort of juxtaposed with this idea of silence. There is also the idea of like, let's say duty versus rights. And because of that, work versus ideals. Like a lot of the essay, a bit of the essay is about how they're expected to do work and to do their sort of like duty for the country, and yet they're not achieving like any kind of ideal situation. So I think it's juxtaposing that idea. Any other parallelism that you found that we should point out? Okay, cool. What else do we have in this rhetorical strategy? Yeah.
I don't know if this is like the original construct. Like you and
Okay, so it kind of goes second person, third person, plural pronoun in the we. And then you said back to he. Or
yeah, and then it goes back to me and then it goes back to me.
this kind of sounds nice here. That you're going from you to him to we. I like that. I'm gonna do this. You.
Like kind of flows like it's a call to action almost.
Yeah, and a call to action. Good rhetorical strategy. Okay. What other strategies we got? Yeah, Ben?
In the middle, he like ends the words with the same sound. So if he goes, and in all cases, to make himself unpleasant, assistant versus.
Ah,
Is there a word for that?
parallelism. I think it's got that kind of sound to it that creates it parallel with the endings of the sentence. You could say it rhymes. You could call it rhyming.
Yeah. That word.
Yeah.
Rhyme time.
He's very good at rhyming. Yeah. Maxwell?
Like you said, stuff with like a grammar and like distances, like those two things.
Okay. as he starts with the counter and disproves, this kind of helps appeal to a sense of ethos. Good. What else? What kind of claim type is he mostly using here? Proposal, I think so. I think he shows the consequences of agitating, and then he justifies those consequences. Yeah, Taya?
A definitional point.
Okay, what's the definition of friend?
All great movements must be pursued.
Awesome. So it's like great movements. What's going to make our movement great? It's going to be the agitation. Any others? Yeah, Cressida?
Allusion
What's the illusion?
to Mrs. Gill.
Awesome. Charlotte Gilman. And then there's a reference in there too to Clarkson. What is the reference doing for this piece? Like, why is he referencing Thomas Clarkson, even if we haven't read the Thomas Clarkson? No, that was Booker T. Washington. Yeah, I think we've got like a sort of indirect reference to his ideological enemy.
Let's be quoted.
Booker. All right. I shouldn't do first name, but it's kind of a fun first name. What is he doing with the Thomas Clarkson reference? When he's saying like, hey, this guy agitated, and he like wrote this book. What's his point in mentioning Thomas Clarkson? Yeah, Maxwell.
Backing it up.
Okay, good. Evidence that agitation works. Okay, what it doesn't do, and this is why I bring that up specifically, what it doesn't do is show that he's educated about the topic. That's the thing I see very most in rhetorical analysis essays is, you know, he does this thing, he uses big words, or he has this reference, or he knows the dates, that shows that he's educated about the topic. What you're gonna do is just assume the writer's educated about the topic. I think like, it's not that they're not doing things to create ethos in that way. I think they are. I think they do. I think he is using this reference to prove that, but it's just kind of a, I don't know. It's, how do I say this? It's a little bit annoying when an 11th grader says that W.E.B. Du Bois, Harvard PhD graduate, is educated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you like point that out, it's like, he didn't need to do that. He was W.E.B. Du Bois, like everyone knew, you know? So instead though, definitely talk about the reference, but talk about it as this way that it's evidence for his point. Yeah.
Yeah, like if there were, I guess like in 2021, like someone was talking about like racial inequality, and they're just like some random nobody who has an opinion.
Yes,
Then
then
talk
talk
back
about
it up.
that.
But then if they were to actually like refer to someone who does know what they're talking about, then that creates like that moment of
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if you're talking, that's a great point. If you're talking about rhetoric about just like some nobody, right, and they reference things, then yeah, that shows that they're educated, right? But if you're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois's rhetoric, like you don't need to talk about how he's educated. Yeah. Yeah, Nancy.
I don't really know how to describe this, but like the word agitation, I mean, like it's not very like a traditional word.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of like sticks out. whenever he-
Why do you think he does that instead of using the word like, why do you think he does it instead of being more specific? And why not use a word like, upset the status quo? Why agitation?
I think just to like make them unite under like a certain word, like
Okay,
kind of like their catchphrase kind of thing, and it's kind of like how political.
Right, right.
It's just a way to maybe like relate with other people who use that same word.
I like that. So it's like this talking point word that's kind of political that way. Yeah, no.
I feel like agitate is kind of like a little bit of like sort of when you're annoying someone, it doesn't provoke as much action. Agitation seems like the person that you are agitating kind of has to respond in some way. Like it's more persistent and consistent, and it's like always gonna be there.
Okay, Okay, so if you wanted to use that as a rhetorical strategy, you could. You could say he uses the word agitation, and that's a specific rhetorical strategy. That'd be so much better too than saying he uses word choice. Sometimes in rhetorical analysis essays, I'll get, oh, he uses diction. But remember, diction, it's just word choice. So basically you're saying he uses words in this essay, which I don't know of any essays that don't, you know? So instead, if you were to just talk about that, then you've got something specific and super interesting to talk about. Yeah.
It also, Max said, he like mentioned the word like relate.
Yeah.
I think everybody knows the feeling of agitation. And so since these people are already aware of the inequality in the racism, they feel that agitation, but so do white people who read it because we know what it's like to be agitated. And so it's like relatable to both people, I guess.
So it can reach this larger audience.
Yeah. It's like, I know it feels like be agitated so much. It's like feel like that all the time, I guess. And that's
Okay, good. I think there's lots of other rhetorical strategies. I think you probably have a lot of good ones. One thing that I had on here that I want to point out is the way that he like disregards cynicism, like he turns cynicism into the enemy when it's like the most optimistic thing you can do is like agitate and complain. That was an interesting little move that he did. But all right, you've got a long list. You've got lists on your paper. I want you to choose the 3 or 4 that you think would be the most interesting to talk about and the ones that go the best with your argument. So in the group, you're choosing 3 or 4 of those strategies or the ones up here that you think prove your argument the best.
Are we gonna have to write this one?
No.
Okay, so we end up with-
Oh, okay.
And put stars next to them or circle them.
Everybody else to actually be able to see how she kind of carries it.
I like that. Agitation. It kind of like it's like it kind of leads to like
Yeah, I was- You know what? It's actually right, but I looked it up.
Okay, once you've got yours chosen, flip over that paper. And there's a little section called dissecting sentences. Okay, we're just gonna do one of them. So choose one of your rhetorical strategies to focus on, whichever one you want to. And you're gonna write down a sentence or part of a sentence that uses that rhetorical strategy. And you're gonna dissect it in the way we have been doing now since the beginning of the year, where we're really breaking down the language choices, but you're writing it on your own paper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably the last thing we'll get to today, but I want you to finish that up. Okay. Okay, that's all we're gonna do today. So turn in whatever you get done on your green sheet. You don't need to finish it just because you're working from home. Just finish the dissecting sentences part and you take pictures and, oh wait, no, I have you doing it on online too. So if you have the green sheet, you can take pictures, turn it in that way. If you have the form, the Google Doc, you'll just turn in what you got to. And that is it for the day.